We're going to take you back to our coverage of the death of Queen Elizabeth as well. Let's bring in Chanel Call at City Hall. You know, Chanel, thinking about the Queen's reign, 70 years, she was Queen for almost half of the time that this country's been in existence.
That's right, 70 years. And so for more on this story, George, I want to bring in Stacy Lee Kong, culture critic and editor of Friday Things. Stacy, thanks so much for making time.
Thank you for having me.
Stacy, I want to start with asking you how you're experiencing this moment as somebody who's a person of color and someone who has roots to previously colonized nations.
Yeah, I think I feel a little bit of sadness. Like, death is always sad, and the Queen was a public figure for 70 years, so it's very normal to feel like you knew her and feel like there's a connection there. And, you know, I think that's also the case for a lot of Caribbean people. I'm from Trinidad, and for women, especially of my mom and my aunt's generations, there's a lot of affection for certain members of the royal family. So there are a lot of people who feel sad. But I think there's also some more complicated emotions that it's also important to acknowledge. So for a lot of people, and not just people from the Caribbean, from a lot of formerly or currently colonized nations, it's really frustrating to see the way the news is covering Queen Elizabeth's death. So it skews very positive. In many ways, it ignores her role as the leader of an institution that engaged in slavery and genocide and the disenfranchisement and brutalization of very real people, many of them racialized. And so I think people see Queen Elizabeth as like a kindly, grandmotherly figure, especially in recent years, and they want to pretend that she's separate from that, but she's not. And when I say history, I don't mean hundreds and hundreds of years ago. King Charles III will inherit hundreds of millions of dollars in private wealth from Queen Elizabeth, and that money comes directly from colonized nations. As late as the 1960s, the Queen did not allow people of color to hold clerical roles in the royal household. In 1963, she ordered her troops to violently suppress uprisings by Yemeni people who were fighting for their independence. And even in her later years, she refused to acknowledge the monarchy's role in colonization. So there are these two ideas, and I know that they feel like they're conflicting, but I think they can coexist. You can personally feel sad that a human being has passed away, while also refusing to ignore that she represented an institution that caused millions of people, many of them alive today, a lot of real pain.
Stacy, you've shared some of this, your perspective on this online, and it has been met with some level of controversy. Can you explain why?
I think people feel like it's disrespectful or indecorous to bring up colonization or to bring up negative things because we're talking about someone who just passed away. And that's a very socially ingrained idea for us, right? To not speak ill of the dead. But our job, I think, as human beings is to look for the real truth. And so it's sad that this mom and grandma and great grandma has passed away. And I understand that for a lot of people, they feel like she was maybe not their grandma, but like a grandma that they knew. But there's this other side of it that is real and nuanced, and it's important to actually acknowledge that. And it's never actually too soon to talk about the reality of someone's legacy. A legacy is a complete thing. It's not just the nice parts.
And very quickly, Stacy, you mentioned the word nuance. This is such a complicated experience that you're describing. What does this say about potentially the future of the monarchy?
I think that's a very good question. The Queen's death has the potential to be quite destabilizing, both politically and culturally, because, you know, she's not just a symbol of the monarchy, she is a symbol of stability and continuity. She reigned for 70 years. So even though there had been conversations about the necessity of the monarchy and the future of the monarchy for probably her whole reign, as a symbol, like, her existence has been a really strong counterpoint. But now we're in an era where we're more willing to talk about things like colonization, racism, and inequality, and we no longer have that symbol. Instead, we have King Charles III, who has historically been significantly less popular than his mother. So I think the Queen's death was always going to feel like the end of an era, but I wonder if in the coming kind of months and years, we're going to see anti-monarchist sentiment gain more of a foothold, and not just in the UK, but also here, right? Where there have been conversations about removing the monarch as our head of state for a really long time.
Okay, Stacy Lee Kong, thanks so much for your time and sharing your perspective with us. We appreciate this.
Thank you for having me.